I'm not a fan of Jay Powell. I would not reappoint him. I thought he was always late, whether it was good or bad, but he was always late. I was surprised he was reappointed. I was very tough on him, and if I wasn't, I think we would have had much higher interest rates for much longer.
Presidential candidate Donald Trump speaking with Larry Kudlow on Fox Business yesterday, taking a shot at the Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell. This ahead of next week's Republican presidential debate in Milwaukee. The former president, still hasn't said whether or not he'll show up to the event, saying, quote, "If you're leading by a lot, what's the purpose of doing it?" I guess that's a question we've got to go ask going into next week. One man who will be on that debate stage is Governor DeSantis of Florida. And this is what he has to say on Chairman Powell. "We need to rein in the Federal Reserve. It's not designed or supposed to be an economic central planner." He's gone on to say it is not supposed to be indulging in social justice or social engineering. It's got one job, maintaining stable prices, and it has departed from that with what it's done over the last many years. Joining us now, I'm pleased to say, Bloomberg's Annmarie. AMH, the former president, not the only one taking shots at the current Federal Reserve chair. What do you think that actually looks like in practice if one of those individuals is in the White House?
Well, it's a great question because, of course, Powell has a term till 2026. So if one of those individuals was to go to the White House, do they fire him? Remember, Trump in 2019 said he should be able to demote or fire Jay Powell. And then one of his most brazen critiques of the Fed chair at that time said he didn't know who was worse for the U.S. economy, Jay Powell or Xi Jinping. So this duel and drama between Jay Powell and the former president is not new. You'd have to be living under a rock if you didn't know how Donald Trump felt about Jay Powell. But it does bode this question that other candidates are going to have to answer. How do they feel about how the Fed has handled the economy? It's been a difficult few years for the Fed, obviously coming out of COVID-19 and this handling of inflation and now the rate hikes, the path of the aggressive rate hikes we are on. So DeSantis is in the Trump camp. The governor is saying a hard no. He would not reappoint him. But then there's others like Governor Chris Christie, who sat down with us and said he didn't think Jay Powell did anything horribly wrong. He would consider it. Obviously, he thought he was a bit late on inflation. But then we spoke to Doug Burgum yesterday, Jonathan. This is the governor of North Dakota. He is running on an economy-first campaign, but he would not speculate about any future appointments, but he doesn't like the way the Biden administration handled inflation.
Let's talk about next week. If you're leading by a lot, what's the purpose of doing it? The former president's words about attending the debate next Wednesday. What are the arguments for and against for his team attending that debate?
Well, I think if the president was to show up, he would take the oxygen out of the room, and potentially he has a chance to lead even further in the polls. He's also an individual that probably doesn't want to be left out and wants to dominate. And the only way to do that is to show up and dominate alongside those other individuals on the debate stage. But at the same time, given the fact that he does have this wide lead in the polls, he's thinking, do I even need to go there? And there's a CNN report that they're leaning towards not showing up, but they, of course, at the same time saying we could change our minds at the 11th hour, and potentially he just does his own counter-programming. And then Republican primary voters will have to flip-flop between the two if they want to see an array of different voices on a stage or just want to hear what the former president has to say.
Let's get those names on the screen again and go through them. Annmarie, give us the guide for next week. From your perspective, the names to watch, outside of the obvious, Governor DeSantis of Florida, who would you be looking for?
Well, I'm really interested to see how Senator Tim Scott plays this, because he's putting millions of dollars at the moment following this debate in ad campaigns. And he sees potentially a way that he can have an uptick in the polls following the debate. Also, Vivek Ramaswamy. This is an individual that we know from troves of documents from a super PAC that is helping and advising Governor DeSantis. They're saying that he should hit Vivek very hard and defend Donald Trump. So it'll be interesting to see how Mr. Ramaswamy deals with that, especially as his numbers have really been rising in the polls.